Welcome to Be Whole, Be Well, and Be Wise, the show that combines science-based and Bible-based education to lead you towards whole body wellness in Christ. I'm Shelly Tyler, and today we're talking about the number one cure for your body, sleep, with Dr. Suzanne Leach. Suzanne is here with us as a co-worker of mine at Rehabilitation and Performance Institute. She has her undergraduate degree from the University of Kentucky and her doctorate of physical therapy from the University of Evansville in 2019. She is residency trained and board certified in orthopedics. Suzanne became interested in sleep during PT school and has presented to numerous clinicians at Rehabilitation and Performance Institute, as well as the Regional American for Physical Therapy Association. Thank you so much for being with us today, Suzanne. Suzanne and I have worked together at Rehabilitation and Performance Institute for a while, and she and I have been digging into some of these deeper health issues and how they impact patient care and injuries and affecting the recovery of people and the overall well-being for patients. And so we thought this would be a really good time just to bring it to light for everybody about how important sleep is. So I'm so glad she's here and bringing all the research to the table.
Yep. So I think I've been unofficially deemed the sleep PT by all my coworkers. I'll preface that by saying this doesn't mean that I'm always perfect. I think sometimes you hear these messages and it's like, people have everything figured out, but this is something that I sometimes struggle with too, and that's also why it's good for me sometimes to get out and talk about these things because it helps. It's a good reminder for me that I need to maybe sometimes get in bed a little earlier, prioritize some of the things that I'm doing to help me rest a little better as well. But definitely a big topic, and we can certainly see how it has a big impact on our patients.
For sure. So, like, we know from a logical standpoint, everybody on the face of the earth knows that we need sleep and that it's important. But for some reason, we as a society and a culture have completely, we've struggled. We've struggled
Hmm.
to get enough sleep. We've struggled to sleep well. Even some people who get in bed at the right time and wake up at the right time, they don't have quality sleep. And we're starting to feel the effects of it now more than ever. Are you noticing this with people during patient care?
Certainly so, and I think there's a lot of things that we're learning and that we know with science and research that it's starting to catch up. So, for example, I think more and more people are starting to be aware of, okay, maybe the food that I'm eating is having an impact on my body, or maybe I'm going to feel better if I exercise. But for whatever reason, I feel like sleep is a little bit behind. I don't know if it just hasn't had enough people advocating for it, but if you look at research and statistics, not just Americans, but around the globe, people are sleeping less and less. And I think I'm sure we'll dive into, there's a lot of factors that influence that. But I don't know if we've quite hit the tipping point where people are realizing how significant what it's doing to their bodies, what a significant change that is. And I think sometimes it's because we don't really recognize the cumulative effect until till it's already happened, or like I'm sure you've heard a lot of people say they don't realize how bad they feel until they feel better.
Right.
There's probably a lot of people who are listening to this who say, "Well, I sleep 6 hours a night, and that's plenty for me." That's fine if you feel that way, but there is a lot of evidence that just supports you can feel that way, but that's simply not the case. And even people who feel that way, there's where optimal is maybe not where what you're at whenever you're sleeping that amount. So
Yeah. I think
I think
optimal.
it's just recognizing it's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that I've been working through, like through functional medicine with, who will say things like that. Like, I sleep 6 hours, but I feel fine. And I'm like, but your body's telling us a different story. Like,
Hmm.
your body's telling us things aren't fine. Like, there's all kinds of things out of whack here. And that could start with just like your body's inability to fully recover from all
Mhm.
the stresses that you're going through. So, once we shift that 6 hours to 8 hours and fix some of these underlying issues, people are like, "Oh, I feel great." Like, I didn't know
Mhm.
I felt bad. It's so
Yeah.
true. Like, we really can shift from like, "Okay, I feel pretty good," or "Okay," to like, "I feel really well with just sleep."
Sleep. And I think too, we're getting to like, why is this such a problem right now? And why has this gotten worse? I do think there's a certain stigma that's associated with sleep. And we've kind of talked about this, like people will take pride in just like what you said, like, "Oh, I do great off of 6 hours," and like that's something to brag about. And one, it's just not accurate, but two, we it 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 shouldn't be something that we're giving out medals for, and it doesn't necessarily, I love the term work smarter, not harder. I think just because you're working really hard doesn't always mean you're working really smart. I can try to run into the wall and I'm working hard, but that's not necessarily getting me anywhere. And I think that for whatever reason, we really glorify. I saw a Facebook post the other day and I was just like, oh, where one of my friends had posted their workout schedule, and it was talking about getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and all these people were commenting, "Oh, this is so awesome. You're so disciplined. I can never do this." And I was thinking, like that's really bad for her REM sleep. And I'm going through my mind all the things that I know are happening because she's she's getting up that early. And um but that's no one's posting on Facebook bragging about that they slept in till 10 a.m., but
Exactly.
that's
It's
that maybe we should. Yeah, maybe we should.
But that I mean, it's seen as laziness, and, um, I've definitely had to shift that in my own personal life because I thought the more productivity, then the more I felt worthy, maybe is like really the underlying thing, probably for a lot of people. Like, I'm just going to keep going, keep producing. And that makes me feel good about what
Mhm,
I've done and what I'm doing. And I think like that is a key thing, like, whenever you fix the whole, like, root cause issue of, like, "Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this to ourselves?" Uh,
mhm,
we're stuck in a society that really values productivity at all hours, at all days, and, it really could never stop, which is pretty scary, but when you do stop, the demands don't stop, and it makes you look or feel lazy or less
mhm.
than or whatnot. So
Well, and we live in such a comparative culture. I think we've probably all had mornings where we slept in and we had a slow morning and we really enjoyed it and we felt great about it until we heard maybe what our friends did with their morning, or then you get to your laundry list of things that you need to do. But just being okay with that, and
this
moving at your own speed sometimes is the hard part.
thief of comparison, it steals your joy. It really does. And like really your body just probably needed that. It
Mhm.
probably just needed to sleep in. Um, so we know it's important. Tell me a little bit more in depth why it is so important. Like, what are the health consequences?
Yeah. So the big thing is, the short duration sleep is defined as less than 7 hours per night. I like to lead with that up front whenever we talk about all these things, because whenever we're looking at research and statistics about what lack of sleep does to your body, most research is done on either 7 hours of sleep per night or 6 hours of sleep per night. We're not talking about people sleeping 3 or 4 hours per night. Like, I think unfortunately 6 or 7 is really normal for a lot of people, but that's what we're talking about here. So cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, diabetes, obesity, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's, all of this has been associated with shorter sleep duration. There's lots of different research, performed in lots of different ways, even things like where they've done studies where they start treating people with sleep apnea, and then we see all these different cardiovascular factors change. There's a lot of different ways we can research this stuff, and it all points to all of these different kind of risk for just your general mortality are impacted by sleep. I heard recently, and I thought this was fascinating, that we now think the number one lifestyle factor that contributes to Alzheimer's is getting less than 7 hours of sleep per night. Not 4, not 5, 7. So a lot of people, seven's a pretty good night of sleep. And I think too, I think about a lot of my friends, a lot of my family members who really take a lot of pride in their mental state and their mental sharpness, and the fact that, hey, this is something that we used to not think that we could prevent, but now there's actually some really good data that shows just not getting good consistent sleep is a major player here. So there's a lot of just kind of overall health things that I like to point out to people. But I also read something recently, and Shelley, I think you found this particularly interesting. We talk about genetics and genetically modified things. So people don't want to eat genetically modified apples. And something that's interesting is there's actually studies that are showing when you're sleep deprived that your genes change. And so what's even more interesting about this is the majority of the genes that are altered with sleep deficiency have to do with immune support and basically your body's ability to repair and take care of itself. So I think that in itself is kind of like, whoa, my body is literally changing when I don't provide it this vital nutrient, essentially.
Yes, I mean, I always think I explain it to people like expression, right? Like you're born with this certain code of genes, and how you live determines how they are expressed or brought out. And a lot of those genes are lifestyle genes too. Like they change
Hmm.
or they're expressed more depending on how you treat yourself. So those are the things that we want to modify and change ourselves just based on good behaviors and good healthy habits. Because if those things are running the show, then you continue to get oxidative stress, and oxidative stress that is just across the board a term that could be used for just general inflammation in your body.
Hmm.
And when that happens, you causes DNA damage and changes. And after DNA is damaged and changed, that's when like you can logically go down the road. Like when your DNA changes, cells change, and you're looking at like loss of memory, loss of
Hmm.
you're looking at loss of core function, immune system going down, cancers, and could it really all be linked to like simple things like this that
And so
we
that's what you mentioned, oxidative stress, and that's what a lot of what we're learning about things like, well, why is a lack of sleep lack to or tied to something like Alzheimer's is when we study the brain, what we see is when you have increased oxidative stress, it leads to neuronal death. So neurons are your brain cells. That's what kind of talks to each other. And I mean, I think sometimes whenever I learn about this stuff, I become reminded that we are probably from, our teenage to our 20 years, like we are in the process of dying. Like our body is we're are losing days, we lose the ability to kind of turn over and repair itself, which can sound really scary, but that's why it makes it so important that the things that our body does to repair itself, that we really protect those processes. And so one of the things that we know, I think this is really cool. A lot of people have heard of the lymphatic system. So your lymphatic system is kind of think of it as like your garbage truck, or your kind of your cleanup crew for your body. Your brain has what's called a glymphatic system, and so they clean up glial cells in our brain. And so whenever we sleep and whenever we need extended sleep to do this, our brain is actually kind of washed over with this fluid that helps to literally cleanse our brain and help decrease that oxidative stress. And so there's literally a purpose. There's a reason why a human being will die sooner from a lack of sleep than they will from a lack of food, a lack of exercise. I mean, it's kind of crazy how long people can survive without eating. But you can't survive that long without sleeping, and I think that's a big reason why is just it's so essential for our brain health and for a lot of other systems in our body.
It is, it's huge. I had to shift my perspective because, well, let's just think about this scenario here. I had, opened a private practice, so, been been under a
Mhm,
tremendous amount of stress, and when there's outward stress and then mental stress, it's all stress. Stress is stress. So I actually needed more sleep during that time. But I did it during a time where I had a nursing infant and a 2-year-old, and then I adopted an 18-month-old. So, like, that was my life, and then my 18-month-old decided not to sleep for 2 years, like, not a single night through the night for 2 years, and then I got a concussion, and so, like, you just add, like, insult to injury, like, I remember saying, like, "I can't remember anything, I just feel stupid," like, simple
mhm,
things, um,
mhm,
I just feel like brain dead, and
mhm,
it literally was because my brain just couldn't function the way that it needed to. So then even after the concussion, trying to just, like, get back to normal, right? Like, all the mental energy, um, like, I had to really shift my perspective because I was like, "This is not working." Like,
mhm.
I can't remember what I did 5 minutes ago at this point, and that was, like, all in real time, and so when I decided, "Okay, what's more important? Like, my long-term presence and health for my family or my short term trying to get this project done for work or trying to, see so many patients a week or what's what's more important?" And when I started to realize that 1% that I was losing every day not sleeping, that because
Mhm.
it's such a slow decline,
Right.
we don't pay attention. So, over the course of those years, I'm losing 1% every day. By the time I'm 4 years into it, I've lost, you know, I've lost so much.
Mhm.
So, then it's like, "Okay, if I keep going like this, by the time I'm 50, like, what's my body going to do?" And
Well,
we just have you have to choose at some point.
and I think a lot of times, and this is something that I think is a big education component with patients, is it can be really overwhelming of there's so many things that we have going on with life and people say, I just don't have time to get more sleep than what I'm getting. You really don't have time not to get sleep, from the sense of your body will stop you at some point. It's just a matter of when. And I kind of think about that in the case of, some of these diseases that affect us later in life, heart disease or dementia, different things of, well, okay, one, if we're not just spending the time early to take care of our bodies, when is this going to catch up with us? And how many years does this take off of our life down the road? But then from the perspective of the here and now, if we're not we know that when people alter their sleep even by an hour or two, our cognition declines, our motor skills decline. And for people who are kind of curious, well, how do they know that if I just sleep, 1 hour less consistently, they do little small tasks, like even our fine motor skills are different. There's
Mhm,
a study of a group of nurses where they look at when they're sleep deprived versus not sleep deprived, how many errors they make on the job, how quickly they can complete different tasks that need to be able to use their hands that are really simple tasks. And so even though we may not feel like we have that time for sleep, you may not be able to be as productive as you could be otherwise if you were running on a full tank here versus whenever you're always running on empty. Our ability to retain information goes down, our ability to form new memories is decreased, our ability to take information from our short-term memory over our long-term memory decreases. And so in a lot of ways I think people think they don't have time to sleep, but they don't realize you could actually be a lot more productive with the time that you are working if you were better rested and really operating at 100% capacity.
Yeah, and creative. I
Mhm.
felt like, before when I used to sleep, before that era, I was a very creative person. And then not even realizing it, like, just had a period of years where I wasn't creative, like, I wasn't really thinking of new ideas or coming up with things, and, when I started sleeping again, I feel like that creativity, like, there was more space, like, there was more space
Mhm.
in my brain to be able to do that, um, so it's true, and you may not always please everybody by sleeping more. I'm just gonna say that. Like, I've missed deadlines because I'm like 9 AM or like 9 PM, like I'm done working and I just didn't get done. And like I just have to be okay with that. There are times where I feel like I've disappointed people and previously would have just stayed up and got it done. And again, it's just a shift in perspective where it's like, is this really that urgent? Like, is this
Mhm.
an emergency? Or would I do a better job tomorrow if I could just get some rest and then finish tomorrow?
Well, and I think too, it's like anything in life, it's all about what you prioritize. I always I don't train for marathons anymore, but oftentimes I look back to when I was marathon training. I was like, golly, how did I have time to run so much? But part of it is I gave up other things. There were social things that I didn't do, or I maybe didn't watch a TV show that I like, or or I didn't set on my phone for there's I think we all have these margins in our life that when something is really, really important to us, we find a way. And I think the problem sometimes is just if sleep isn't even on your radar of something that you need to prioritize, then it's really easy to just stay up a little later, even if I'm an advocate for reading. I'm not saying reading a book is a negative thing, but maybe stay up a little later reading or just doing something else because we're like, oh, well, I think getting 6 hours of sleep is fine. And so I think a lot of times it's just even recognizing that it's something that's important and may really be impacting how you feel so you can prioritize it.
For sure, for sure. Um, I want you to tell me about there was a study that you found that Harvard tracked some adults in Greece. Tell me about that study.
Oh yeah, hold on. I've got that info here. So it was Harvard tracked. It was like 23,000 adults, and this is in Greece, and this was I'm actually I need to I read this on a Harvard website, and I was actually thinking the other day because I was reading through some of this, I would love to see like what caused the nap break to end. But basically these people in Greece were used to having a 1 p.m. nap break. And what Harvard found is that when this nap break ended, there was a 37% increased risk for death from heart disease and an overall 60% risk of mortality risk increased by 60%. And I think those numbers are just alarming. And that's from taking a nap away.
Yeah,
And that's there we talk a lot about sleep, and I think there may even be more of a stigma about taking a nap during the middle of the day, but we have to recognize, like, that's just our culture. There's other cultures where napping is perfectly fine and perfectly normal, and so there's some research to also support, mortality is impacted or improved whenever people take naps, and but yeah, that's a really large study, so that's pretty powerful information.
it is. It's huge. It had a huge sample size. And honestly, I thought back when you brought that study up. I lived in Argentina for a summer and they did take a siesta every day. Everything shut down. Like you couldn't even go buy like a thing of eggs. Like there was nothing open, nothing to do. Actually, this was before I had a smartphone. So I didn't have anything to do. So I just took a nap every single day for a couple months. And sometimes we would stay up late, but there was just so much freedom to sleep in there. Like it was like they really valued their sleep more than productivity, but I didn't feel like they got any less done than we
Mhm.
than we do. Like I don't feel like there was a drop off in how much was accomplished. They just really had that priority set, and I just thought it was so wild at first. Like,
Well,
hmm,
and I think kind of the scariest and the largest, example, and you don't even have to this isn't a randomized controlled trial, this isn't happening in a lab, but one of the things that is a easy study to look at is every year we lose an hour of sleep in the spring and we gain an hour of sleep in the fall.
mhm,
And what's interesting is every year following springing forward, we see an increase in car accidents. We see an uptick in emergency room visits for cardiovascular events. But what's interesting is then in the fall, we see the inverse. There's a decrease in car accidents. There's a decrease in cardiovascular issues. Heard recently that there's even a study that looked at like federal judges and basically the what they handed out as far as not the discipline, but like the rulings that they handed out were harsher in the spring following losing an hour of sleep. So I'm like, we're wrecking our cars, we're having heart attacks, and we're being mean to people. Like it's one, I'm an advocate for I don't know what has to be done for like daylight savings time to go away. I don't know anyone who likes it. But what's interesting too is even though, you hear people in the spring all the time, oh, I love the extra hour of sunlight that I get. But there's studies that show people are more depressed in that time following springing forward. And it's not because they're not getting sunshine. You hear how much people love that. And we know the benefits of being out in the sun and of daylight. It's because they're not sleeping. And there's just that's a simple shift, and that's an easy way to see like, okay, that's having an impact on us.
huge. I think it took me a month to get over it this time. Like, I really feel like I was like fell off for like a month just with being on a sleep schedule.
Yep.
Um, so let's talk about the REM versus non-REM. Let's
Yep.
talk about that. I think this is very interesting.
So one thing that I didn't really understand all that well until I started kind of deep diving into this, I always thought that REM sleep was like that's the one I need, and that non-REM was less important. That's not really the case. And so I think it's really important to understand that our body cycles through phases of sleep. So or really not our body, but our brain cycles through these phases of sleep. They last about 90 minutes where we're kind of ebbing and flowing between REM and non-REM, but you get more non-REM in your early sleep and you get more REM in your later sleep. And so it's not that one is good or bad. They do different things for your body and you need both. I think it'd kind of be like saying, fruits bad or vegetables, like you need an assortment in your
Right.
diet just like you need different phases of sleep. But they do have different benefits. So for example, one of the things with like learning, like a lot of our consolidation of memories happens during non-REM sleep. um, where, for example, a lot of testosterone is replaced during REM sleep, which is kind of our later sleep. And so I think something that's really important to know about this is a lot of times we talk a lot about how much sleep people get, but our consistency of sleep is actually really important. So one of the things that we know happens is, okay, let's say everybody pretty much understands 8 hours of sleep is good. But if you are someone who 5 nights a week, you go to bed at, we'll say 9:30 and you get up at 6 a.m., you probably get 8 hours of sleep. If your sleep efficiency is good, we consider good sleep efficiency that you probably get about 90%, or that you're sleeping about 90% of that time. I would argue a lot of people don't have that efficiency and that's their greater issue.
Mhm.
But one thing that we know is if then on the weekends you're staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning, even if you are sleeping in until 11, you're likely missing a lot of your non-REM sleep because your sleep schedule shifted. Or vice versa, if there's a few mornings a week that maybe you normally get up at 6, but those few mornings you're getting up at 4 a.m. to get in a workout or to do some work or whatever reason that you would get up at 4 a.m., that you're losing some of that REM sleep. And both are going to be impacted, but not necessarily equal. And I think that's a big component that people don't maybe factor in, is that efficiency is something that should be, and consistency of that sleep time may be just as important for them as the total number of sleep that they get.
Yeah. So, how would you suggest people know how efficient they're sleeping?
So that's a tricky question. We'd like to be able to say like, oh, well, if I just wake up feeling rested, but as we've seen, a lot of people are sleeping not as much as they should be, and they think that they feel rested, but maybe they don't. When you are in those deeper cycles of sleep, whenever you're like completely conked out, that's that like whenever someone's like kind of hanging with like their arm off the bed in a weird way, you're in a different phase of sleep. For example, when you're tossing and turning. So there's some factors that you can say of like, well, if you never felt like you're able to really like be stationary, sleep still, but we're sort of guessing still. Obviously, everyone knows about wearables. There's a lot of technology that's out now. There's a lot of different companies that look at sleep. Someone who truly is having like a major sleep issue, I would say it may actually be worth having a sleep study done where they look at your brain and what's happening. But there's a lot of different wearables out there. I know Shelly and I have both used the Whoop band, which has pretty good efficiency. Apple Watch now looks at like HRV and different things. Garmin devices look at HRV. There's a company called Aura that makes a ring that you can wear. But I think the biggest thing is that if your wearables are great, but sometimes that can just be one more thing. And I think also in some cases can kind of get in our head a little bit. I think the big thing is that you're sleeping well and uninterrupted is your biggest thing, and that you're getting the amount of sleep that you need, and that the time's not varying a lot. So I think that can be just a good starting point. If you're waking up a lot, that quality is probably not what it is, but you may not be cycling through that REM and non-REM the way that you should be.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say there's an optimal time to go to bed and wake up, like based on that?
So it's kind of interesting because you think about midnight is, I heard this on a podcast and I was like, oh, that's a really good point. Like, what does midnight mean? 12 o'clock, middle of the night. Like that would mean you're, going to bed at maybe 7 o'clock and getting up at, 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock, 4 o'clock, however you want to look at it. Um, but there is likely a little bit that you need to follow with daylight cycles. So you're going to sleep better whenever it's dark outside. You're going to wake better whenever it's light outside. Um, in general, I think that 10 to 6 gets talked about a lot as kind of your frame. What that is for everybody is going to be a little bit different, but we do know whenever people travel between time zones and things like that, that they don't get as good of quality of sleep, or that we can see kind of changes happen. But that's what I've heard talked about the most is kind of a 10 to 6 time frame. But I'd say the biggest thing I've learned with all of this is, if 90% sleep efficiency is good, I used to always think, okay, well, if I get in bed at 10 and I get up at 6, that's 8 hours of sleep. And one of the things that I learned about myself whenever I started using a wearable device that was maybe a little more geared towards sleep, is one, some devices just track your time that you're in bed. And so that's not really necessarily gauging your sleep. But I wasn't as efficient of a sleeper as I thought. And so what I've learned about myself is that if 10 to 6 is going to be that window that I'm sleeping, well, I probably need to go ahead and get in bed at 9:30, or that may mean I'm getting up at 6:15 or 6:30. But
Mhm.
um, your sleep efficiency, 90% is good. And that means you're adding at least 30, 45 minutes. But for a lot of people, their sleep efficiency is much lower than that, especially as we age, our sleep efficiency goes down. So for older, for in my case, when I'm working with older patients, maybe someone who's in their 60s, 70s, or in their 80s, they need to be sleeping a lot more than they think, because we know your efficiency actually decreases as we age. So that's something I think is a big thing for people, is making sure you're actually in bed long enough.
Yes, for sure. And it's you also have to take, especially in that older age range, you have to take into consideration any nighttime waking. Sometimes you might have to fix some of those issues, like if you have a pelvic floor issue or
Mhm.
have a gut issue that's impacting how you're sleeping. Sometimes you need to fix those things because it really is not normal to wake up 3 or 4 times a night to go to the bathroom.
No.
It is not normal. Now, if you're 95 and you wake up once a night, I might be okay with it. But
Mhm.
other than that, like, really, you should still be able to sleep. We have just seen that it's a common problem. A lot of people do it, so we think it's normal. And unfortunately, a lot of physicians have just told you it's normal, that you're getting older. That's just part of it. No, well, you're
It's
getting older
not.
and it becomes common, but it really can be changed. And I've seen that
Mhm.
happen for men and women because men struggle with it too. They just don't talk about
Right.
it as much. Um,
Well, and I was gonna say there's a really cool study, and gosh, it's honestly it's kind of scary. Where they took iPad usage and they had patients spend or not patients. I say patients a lot, but they're not necessarily patients. But they had participants in this study sit on an iPad, use an iPad for an hour, and I would say even though it was an iPad, we could apply the same thing to a cell phone, a
for sure.
mobile device with a light,
A screen.
where they were on it for an hour, and what we saw was there was a 50% reduction in melatonin production, which I think everybody kind of knows, or melatonin is kind of a buzzword. We know melatonin that helps us sleep. Our body produces it when it's light outside. We have less of it. As it gets dark outside, we start producing melatonin, and that builds. Well, there's a 50% reduction in the melatonin, and that melatonin hit the system, or hit those people's brains 3 hours later. So not only did it reduce the melatonin, it delayed when that melatonin set in, and all of that has an effect on those sleep cycles that we're talking about. What was really crazy to me about this study was not only were those people impacted that night, there was this carryover effect. So if on a Monday night you spend an hour on your iPad, not only is your melatonin production impacted on Monday night, but they were seeing impacts 2 or 3 nights later, even when people didn't use the iPad, that they still had that kind of that hangover effect on the melatonin that their body was producing because of
Wow.
an hour of. And think about how many people are. Yeah, I scroll through my phone, or I
So
check
many.
emails for work, and that's a really common thing, and I mean, it just totally halts our body's readiness to go to bed, and that can play a big factor in that efficiency that we were talking about.
Yes. So if you're like, I have trouble falling asleep, and when I wake up, I feel tired, that, I mean, that screen could be playing a huge role in it. I will say, if you struggle with it, it's a temptation because honestly, it's wired to give us that dopamine hit and to give to make us,
Mhm.
so we want to pick it up all the time and look at it and talk to people and all that. But you have to separate yourself from it at a decent time at night. So I put mine on airplane mode after a certain time. Like nothing comes through. There's no distraction. Because if I let it come through, I'll want to look at it, you know. And then I would suggest moving your phone away from your bed. Um, for the distraction, but also because there are all these electromagnetic frequencies. We can save that for another time that that impact your brain. But move your phone somewhere else. And even if you use it for an alarm, move it somewhere else. Get on the same I know this isn't possible for everybody, but a similar sleep wake cycle as your spouse, and get that phone away from the side of your bed so that you're not laying in bed for an hour right before you go to sleep, because it's going to start a whole cascade of events, and it impacts your anxiety about the next day and what's going on. So just get it away.
Well, and
Because,
it's not just before we sleep. So there's a statistic that I saw recently, and I was like, wow, that's scary. That 80% of teenagers reported at least once a week they would wake up during the night unprompted and check their phones.
oh my God,
So that basically their brain, that they're checking on their phones frequently enough that they have now programmed their brain to wake them up to feel like they need to check that. But like you said, it's a dopamine hit.
it is.
And I think too, that anticipation of waking up, checking our phone, something I've even tried doing recently or implementing or being better about is I have a tendency of I'll wake up and then oh I've got this text message from last night because I'm like you, I'll put my phone on do not disturb, and so I'll maybe scroll through my messages, or I've got a little time in the morning, I'm gonna scroll through my phone, and like it's probably the worst thing, and not no doubt about it, it's the worst thing I could be doing is my morning routine. So something I've tried to do recently is um, not just take the phone away at night, but that doesn't need to be the first thing I do in the morning, because then there's this anticipation that our brain becomes wired to do, that I don't want to wake up, and if I've got a day that I can sleep in, I want to be able to sleep in. I don't want my brain waking me up so that it can check something on Instagram. Like I want to sleep.
Just think about what did you do before smartphones? Like everybody probably remembers that that's listening to this. So what did you do before smartphones? You had an old-fashioned alarm clock if you needed one. Um,
Hmm.
and you just went with that. Like you may have read before you went to sleep or whatever. Just think, what did you do before the smartphone? And try to go as close back to that as you can.
Right, right.
But let's talk about kids for a minute because I noticed as we were starting into elementary school with our children, like the demands on kids were just really intense. Like the amount of stress a kindergartner is under to read and write and do all the things in an all day school program. Um, Homework, the social changes, and trying to figure out who you are in the world, and
Hmm.
how to interact with people, the activity involvement, just the sheer number of hours that the kids were expected to be alert and attentive to do something. It was, I mean, I was kind of blown away, like with my first kindergartner, like, oh, this is what we're doing. Um, so then come my second child, he was really starting to struggle going to school, even, like, getting up in the morning because we couldn't seem to squeeze everything he needed to do in a day, and he would become exhausted. But then he also seemed to be hurt all the time. He also seemed to be emotionally frazzled a lot of the time, and,
Hmm.
we even, like, put a little sign up on our fridge, and it wasn't just for him, it was just for our whole family because we just needed some emotional regulation, but just HALT, halt, like a little stop sign, and when people would get crazy, it'd be like, "Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Or are you tired?" And a lot of times with him, it was, "I'm tired. I'm tired."
Hmm.
Like, that's why I'm acting like that, and that was just a huge reason that we knew homeschooling would benefit him because he fell into the category that most kids fall in. Like, he needed 10 to 12 hours of sleep, like, needed, and that's where most kids fall, and if he didn't get 10 to 12 hours of sleep, then we're dealing with a different person.
Hmm. One of the things that I found, like, honestly particularly alarming with a lot of this stuff is, uh, so I told you before we started the podcast, there's a stat that I heard recently that 70% of parents believe that their children get enough sleep, but only 11% of teenagers do. So I'm around a lot of teenage patients and students a lot. My husband is a teacher and a coach, and we have a lot of high school kids kind of in and out of the spaces around us. And so um, that was kind of eye opening to me. And then that kids now are getting 2 hours less per night of sleep than they were 50 years ago. And I think there's a lot of issues that we look at that have kind of become these societal things where like, well, why is this happening with kids in our country, and why, why is this going on, or why is that going on? And well, we're sleeping 2 hours less than we were 50 years ago. Like maybe that's somewhere that we should start. Not only to mention the effects that it has on cognition and learning, but I think even a lot of psychological issues, a lot of issues with violence, and that all of that has a bigger, we know there's higher suicide attempts and suicide rates of completion whenever people are sleep deprived. And so I think it's all kind of has a trickle down effect of some really, really serious issues that are affecting our whole country, but especially youth in our country. And sleep's really important. There's kind of, we talked about the time change thing earlier. That's an easy way to study time change. Well, there is also a great amount of research that shows when you delay school start times, test scores improve. There's less car accidents. You have higher rates of like truancy improves, so kids actually being in school and making it to school. And so that's an easy way to study, is whenever you take a single school system and then that entire school system pushes back their start time, and you see all these positive changes. Nothing else changed. It's the same kids,
Yeah.
it's the same parents, it's the same, issues, but they just have a later start time where they're able to sleep a little more. And I think the we talked about the stigma. The way that children and especially teenagers' brains are wired is those circadian rhythms are a little different than they are for an adult. So we talked about, for an adult, 10 to 6 may be a pretty good sleep time, but we know for a lot of teenagers, their body doesn't start going through a lot of those changes that kind of cue sleepiness and your body's readiness to sleep until actually later at night. And so I deal with a lot of high school kids. It's easy for me to be like, go to bed at 10 o'clock, go to bed at 9 o'clock, but their bodies are oftentimes wired to stay up later. And so if they're staying up till midnight, because that's what their body is telling them to do, and then we're asking them to get up at 5:30 in the morning to get on a bus, or to, get ready for school, or drive their younger sibling to school and then go to the high school afterwards. Well, they're getting sleep deprived and they're having 5 days of sleep deprivation, and then on the weekend, they're trying to catch up, and we're like, "Hey, you lazy kid, get out of bed. You can't sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon." Well,
Yeah.
maybe they need to.
No,
But it's like, "Oh, this is such an awful cycle."
it's so true. It's so true. Like, I don't have teenagers yet, so we haven't crossed into that zone, but I know for the littles, um, like, and I know other moms out there will feel this, like, when your child is sleep deprived, like, everybody loses their minds, right? Like, all logic goes out the window. We For a very long time, like, if there was an event after 7:30, we're like, we can't, like, we just can't do it, because it is not worth it. Like, nothing's worth what's gonna happen the next day. So, we still, like, we're probably one of the very few people that we know that really try to still get their bedtime at 8 o'clock. And that doesn't mean our kids fall asleep at 8 o'clock.
Mhm.
That means, like, we're in bed at 8 o'clock. We read to them, and then, by the time they settle down 30 minutes later, they might be asleep. But I know very few people that stick to that schedule because sports are pushed later and later, and it makes it really difficult. But I kind of want to explain, like, what happens whenever people lose their mind, because whenever my kids lose their mind or they're acting a certain way, like, if I have a scientific reason, this is why they're acting that way, I can handle it a lot better.
Right.
I can handle it a lot better. So when a person doesn't sleep, they go into fight or flight mode. Like, they are just surviving. So their sympathetic nervous system is just really on fire. And what happens there to our brains is we're not concerned about the logic behind things. All the blood actually rushes away from our prefrontal cortex, like where we make all the good decisions.
Mhm.
This is where like we reason
All
through.
rational thinking.
Yes, all
You get a
rational.
little less of that.
Yes, we get a little less of that. So we're in survival mode, just trying to make things work. And so instead of thinking, this is like a child, instead of saying, yeah, I'm tired, I should take a nap. Like you
Mhm.
get fits, turmoil, screaming, or hyperactivity, like they're just bouncing off the walls because they cannot even logically think that napping would be a good idea. um it's not possible. So as parents, like when I start to see that reaction and I can walk them through, like, are you tired? Like, let's take a few deep breaths and like, are you tired? And maybe we should rest for a few minutes. Then they can learn to regulate their emotion a little bit and get back into that parasympathetic state. And then taking a short nap could very well impact their sleep that night and the next day. If I know that is what's happening, then I don't get as triggered and get into fight or flight like someone's coming at me like a crazy person. And I can say, I can help you. Here's what's happening. If I know that somebody, like if I know my oldest child who's 10, if I know he is going to be up a little later than normal, I do still make him have quiet time. And he lays down in his bed. He may not go to sleep, but he will have 30 minutes where he just lays in his bed,
Mhm.
quiet, nothing. Because even just that bit of rest will allow his brain to slow down just a little bit and and impact him positively the rest of the day. So when your household is a wreck, like you have to think, like, are we getting enough quality sleep? Am I getting enough quality sleep? Am I too reactive? Are they getting enough quality sleep? Do they just feel completely exhausted? Are our schedules just overly busy? And making that small adjustment can simply just take a child who's out of control and bring them to a place where they can be in a more parasympathetic state and use their prefrontal cortex to actually make healthier decisions. Um,
Right.
so, but like, so that's one aspect is just how busy we are that we're not getting enough sleep. But there are lots of other things that are impacting our sleep that we don't necessarily think about. Let's talk about some of those.
Yep. So you saying that about kind of planning and timing and, if you do have to stay up a little bit later, it kind of had me thinking about, so one of the things that actually has a big impact on sleep is timing of our meals. And so I think that's something that maybe you are going to be up a little bit later, but can you still eat dinner at an earlier time? Because we know that whenever you eat later, it has an effect on your hormones. You get this insulin spike, it affects cortisol. And so that goes back to that sleep efficiency that we talked about of you may still get to sleep 8 hours that night, but if you had a really late meal, if you had alcohol with that meal, that's a big thing that impacts sleep. And um, I'm not like the beer police or anything like that, but that is one thing is alcohol has a huge detriment on sleep. And a lot of times people don't realize that because they are able to fall asleep so easily if
Mhm.
they've had, a glass of wine or had a beer, but the quality of sleep is what gets disrupted. So late meals, consumption of alcohol, especially later in the evening, those are things that can maybe be altered or controlled a little bit easier, even if the total amount of time that you're sleep, you're maybe not able to, let's say you can't get that 8 hours. Okay, well, let's get as much out of the 7 hours that we can. And so food timing would be something. And I think that's probably a big thing. I saw it. I coached for several years. My husband coaches, and I know that's something that can be a really uh, a difficult process with kids in sports is they're getting out of their sport and don't do we could go on a whole nother tangent about why it's important for them to get nutrients after they exercise, but I
Yeah.
think those big meals, if we can have those before or earlier in the evening, that can play a big role on the quality of sleep that we're getting. But for adults too.
Yeah, my boys play soccer at night, and I feed them at 3:30 or 4 on those nights, and then I do feed them something afterwards too, but it's like a heavier meal before and then a
Mhm.
lighter meal on that back end, and it has made a difference. I'm glad you brought up the alcohol thing. So, if we're talking about genetics, I think this is a really cool thing to know about yourself if you ever do genetic testing. But there's a gene called a COMT gene, and it talks about kind of how your body detoxifies, like whether you're able to efficiently detoxify things. And if you have this gene, then you really actually struggle detoxifying in an efficient way. So, for instance, I I might have green tea, but if I'm gonna have it, I'm gonna have it very early in the day because my body doesn't clean out that caffeine as quickly as other people. It's the same thing with alcohol. Like if you have that comp gene and you're having alcohol right before you go to bed, it's gonna severely impact your sleep, more than you actually
Well,
realize.
and we should probably say, Shelley, regardless of your genetics, it will severely impact your sleep.
Yes,
It it is worse than
it is
if you have
worse.
because I I'm someone who I love a good craft beer, and I'm kind of I guess like a little bit of a beer nerd, and I like trying different things. And so I would have like a beer with dinner, and it was crazy to me when I was using the Whoop band and really looking at the quality of my sleep, how much just like a beer would impact, a beer with dinner. I'm like, it's not like I'm like out getting drunk or staying up late, but a beer with dinner would impact a night of sleep. It's wild.
It is wild, and I know a lot of people that think that a glass of wine right before bed is not impacting them, and I guarantee you it is. And the only way
Mhm.
to know is take it away for like 23 days. Take it away, let your body reset, and then add it back in and see what happens because you'll notice the change for sure.
And I think what you said there is important too. I want to come back to, I don't want to forget to discuss caffeine because that's kind of also along the, when you brought up tea. But on that same line of taking it away for 23 days, just like I talked about in the iPad study, person use an iPad and their sleep is impacted from just that iPad use for several nights following. Just like we talked about with time change, it's not just the night after, it's several weeks after. It takes our bodies a while to adapt to things. So I think if there's anything that you're wanting to try or to kind of trial to see, does this help my sleep? Does it make it worse? Does it make it better? You don't need to do it just like 2 or 3 nights and
Yep,
then give up on it. Like, it really does take a little bit of time, and I think it'd be hard too because you probably don't wanna change too many variables at once because you won't know what helped or what didn't help, but you do have to give some of these things time because sleep is essentially cycles. There's a lot that goes into it. There's adenosine and there's all these different chemicals and things in our brain and body that are being regulated. And it's not like you're going to change it one night. Your body is still anticipating you're going to go back to that habit. And so it's kind of made its own habits based off of what you're doing, what you're putting into it, what you're exposed to. So it really takes a bit of time to make a change and know if it's something that was helpful for you or not.
for sure. Yeah. Um, so along with the things that we can control with our sleep, there are also some other things I wanted to get into as far as like deeper root causes for your lack of sleep.
Mhm.
So I do know some people that are doing all the right things, right? You're checking all the
Mhm.
boxes, you're going to bed consistently, you're waking up and going to bed with a light, all the things, but for still some reason you can't sleep or you're not sleeping well. You're waking up tired. And some of these could be deeper issues. For instance, like serotonin, that's a hormone that our body needs, and it is metabolized in the gut lining. So when we look at some of the pathways that cause that to happen, our organic acids that are in the gut lining, they get broken down when our gut has leaky gut, or you're struggling with bad bacteria or lack of good bacteria. So when that organic acid pathway gets disrupted, then tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. It gets disrupted and you're not able to metabolize serotonin the way you need to. So it becomes a cascade of events. So really, what you're eating and how you're eating
Mhm.
could be impacting your sleep more than you know, and it could be from damage long ago. So, if you have candida or yeast, that's going to impact that pathway. If you have a lack of good bacteria that can't fight off bad bacteria, that could be impacting that pathway. So, if you have questions about that, listen to the podcast episode before this one about your gut, because I think that will help explain some of that pathway and what you need to repair to be able to have good hormone production. But it's huge because no one thinks about their gut impacting their hormone levels. No one thinks about their gut impacting their sleep. And I'm telling you, when I've worked with people improving their gut function with otherwise disrupted sleep, they're checking all the boxes. I now have someone who is sleeping through the night at almost 70 years old, no sleep disruptions just by fixing the gut. And that's huge. It's huge. So,
Mhm.
um, I don't know, just always something to consider if you're doing all the right things. You've tried it for a month. You've tried all the right things for a month and it's not working.
Well, and I think whenever you say that about people are quick to say, "Well, I woke up because I had to pee." No, our brains are pretty smart. They know that you're trying to sleep right now, and they sometimes, yes, you do have to get up and go use the bathroom, but you're just not getting deep enough sleep that now you're getting a very light signal is enough to wake you up. You're a light sleeper
Yeah.
essentially. And so I think that's when, if you are waking up frequently because of different disturbances, maybe because you have to use the bathroom, because you're you just easily wake up, maybe it's the smallest sounds can wake you up. It's really maybe not so much that you're a light sleeper, but that you need to examine, well, why am I not getting into those deeper phases of sleep that really allow me really restorative sleep and rest?
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true.
We mentioned caffeine.
Yes.
So mentioning caffeine with tea made me think of that. I think a lot of times when I talk to people about sleep, I realize it can be like telling you just need to add more hours to the day, and that's not really realistic. And so
Right.
sometimes I think finding what is the lowest hanging fruit and some like super easy things that we can do or direct people to. And one of the things that I see people have maybe some misunderstanding around is caffeine. And so everyone knows what caffeine is. That's not a secret. But I think one of the things that's misunderstood about caffeine is exactly how it works and how our body processes it. And so the half life of caffeine is 5 to 7 hours. So, what half life means, if you're not someone who's just a chemistry nerd, I'm not either. Half life is how long does it take for your body to essentially filter out half of that product. So, meaning if you have a cup of coffee at 12 o'clock, well, at 7 p.m., you still have half of that caffeine circulating around in your bloodstream, maybe more, maybe less, depending on who you are, but on average. And so, one of the things that I know can make a big difference in my sleep, I'm a coffee drinker. Um, and I say coffee, but we could even get into what foods have caffeine in them. And there's a lot of other products that we can find caffeine. But I know for me, if I have caffeine after like 1 or 2 o'clock, there's no shot that I'm going to be able to fall asleep at 9 or 10 o'clock. And I see people all the time, drinking a soft drink for dinner, or having an iced latte at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that is either going to affect your sleep and your ability to fall asleep that night, or even if you fall asleep, it's going to affect your ability to get into those deeper phases of sleep that night. And so I think that's a big one that I'm not saying don't have caffeine. That's fine if you want to have it, but you do need to be aware of that timing of when you have caffeine.
Oh, for sure. It really does impact it. So when when you look at your genetics and your gut function and how your hormones are being produced and how all of that stuff impacts your ability to sleep, we also have to consider, once that happens, then sleep will actually impact your hormones. Your lack of sleep will impact your hormones as well. Like you can
Hmm.
look at it the other way around, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
So go ahead.
oh, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say is one of the things that I've talked to people a lot about, especially men, is the drop in testosterone that occurs if you're not sleeping enough, and specifically if you're getting up too early, because we know when a lot of testosterone is replenished is in those last couple hours of sleep in night. And there's actually a study that I'd heard about with college males where they're basically sleep deprived for some time, and then even they try supplementation, different all these different things, and essentially the only thing that ever got their testosterone back up to normal levels was replenishing their sleep. I think we'll probably moving forward see less and less studies about sleep deprivation because their researchers are actually getting to the point where like, well, this is unethical to actually deprive people from sleep anymore, which should tell you enough about that it's important. The fact that we don't even want to research it anymore because it's too harmful.
Yes.
um, but I think that the whole bit about testosterone is super helpful or super informative, and especially when we talk about like just what man wants to be told that their testosterone levels are going to be lower, but it's an important hormone for women too. But also with women, our follicle stimulating hormone and our ability to for fertility and just that we can reproduce, that all of that gets impacted with sleep as well.
Yes. So it really becomes this cycle, right? That it becomes hard to break, and that eventually is going to impact our weight. It's going to impact our minds. It's going to impact our spirits. Like when we don't sleep, our hormones are thrown out of balance, and it leads to a ton of changes that just keep cycling. And specifically, we will start to gain weight.
Hmm. And I think one thing that's interesting too is if anyone's ever stayed up super late, maybe maybe they were out late with friends, maybe you stayed up late in college studying, you know that you kind of get those like, oh, I need a snack right now, or you start to feel hungry. And that is actually because there's a hormone that called ghrelin that is your kind of hunger. It's your body telling you that you want food. And that's because that hormone gets kind of upticked whenever we are sleep deprived. And so I think one thing that can be interesting is not only does a lack of sleep, it can make it where we actually will hold on to fat. So there's some studies that show that if you're losing weight and you're sleep deprived, you're actually more likely to lose lean mass than you are body fat, which is just kind of crazy that our bodies are smart enough to do that. But if our body is sensing that we are in a not ideal survival situation, it's gonna hold on to body fat.
Mhm.
But I think it's also interesting because not only is our body physically keeping us from losing weight or making us gain weight, but then our decision making is being impacted. Like we think we're hungry when we're not, and then like you were talking about earlier, we're not getting as much blood to that frontal cortex that helps us make good rational decisions and maybe eat a healthy snack versus diving into a bowl of ice cream. And so this becomes the cycle of not only are we making good we're not making good decisions around our food, but then our body isn't able to kind of regulate and take care of the food that we are putting into our body,
Yes.
and do with it what we need.
Haven't you heard the person, like I've just heard this so many times. So it's not directed at any specific person, but they come in and they're like, I just don't know why I do that. Like I don't even know why I do that. I was doing good and then I stayed up late watching a show and I just ate everything. I'm like, well, I mean, I can physiologically tell you why like
Hmm.
why you did it. The point is that it's not like you're a bad person and like you made the wrong decision. You really just needed to be preventative and proactive by not staying up late and watching the show. Like that never would have happened had we not stayed up late and watched the show. And I mean, that's the truth.
Well, I
So,
love what you said about your kids of when when everything is crazy, stopping asking, are we hungry? Are we tired? Are we upset? And I think we can apply that same thing to adults is sometimes when we're hungry, we're actually tired.
yes,
And so it's identifying those things. And back to that example that we talked about in the very beginning, when we're saying, oh, I operate fine off 6 or 7 hours of sleep, but do you? Or are you just confusing some of the other things that you're feeling with fatigue?
right. If you're telling me your hormones are out of whack and you're gaining weight and your body hurts, but you're telling me you're feeling fine on 6 hours of sleep, like I'm not buying it.
Yeah,
They
for
are
for sure.
connected. They are connected. So we know there's a lot of things that are impacting our sleep negatively, and we had to touch on all those so everybody could know. Like you have to have the knowledge to be able to change. So now
Hmm.
you know how important it is. Let's not get overwhelmed because it can feel overwhelming. Like, how am I going to do this? But there are things that we can do, and there are things that we can control to optimize our sleep and to improve our overall health. So let's talk about the can do's.
Okay. The first thing we can control that I think personally is the easiest, the thermostat.
Oh yeah.
So, this is one that sometimes I say this to people, they don't believe me. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, they've done research where they put people to sleep at lots of different temperatures, and the evidence is pretty clear. 64 to 68 degrees is the ideal sleeping temperature. I talk to spouses all the time that they're like, well, you're going to have to tell my husband. That's fine. Like, and I'm not trying to like be on the cold person's side or, because there's always the person like, I think it should be warmer. I think it should be colder. I'm not trying to pick any sides. I'm just telling you what the evidence says.
That's right.
And that is your ideal sleeping temperature is in that window. So, how you can know, well, there's two ways you can know if you're sleeping with a room that is too warm. A would be if you are waking up and you've maybe got like a foot hanging outside of the covers, or you've got an arm out of the covers. That is your body's way of trying to cool itself, especially if you're finding that you're sticking your feet outside of your covers. That's an area that we lose heat. That's why you want to have warm socks on in the winter. So our body temperature actually drops at night. That's part of what kind of gets us ready for bed, and then it starts to rise back up as it's time for us to wake up. And so that's all kind of has to do with that circadian rhythm and that signaling to your brain that it's time for good deep quality sleep and all those different sleep cycles we talked about. So if you are waking up in the middle of the night with your foot hanging out of the bed, that is one way you can know you're sleeping with the room too warm. If your thermostat is set to anything above 68 degrees, that's another way you can know if you're sleeping with the room too warm. Now, I realize I don't have children. I've had a lot of moms tell me like, we just can't sleep with it that cold because of our kids. I don't know if your kid's room needs a space heater. I don't know what the answer is there. Maybe Shelly, you can give a little more insight on that. But I do
I
think,
think they
or
can
if
always bundle up if they need.
bundle up and like
Yeah.
if your spouse doesn't like it, well, tell them that you love them and you want to see them live till a very late age and be very healthy, and that they can put a hoodie on and some gloves. I don't know, but that temperature needs to be a lot cooler than a lot of people have it.
And you will adapt too. Like
Yes.
just because you're uncomfortable, like everything, right? You're going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. Just because you're uncomfortable with it doesn't mean it's bad.
I'm a very cold-natured person. Anyone who works with me knows that. If you've lived with me, you know that. But we keep our house cold for that reason. I just bundle up and then I kind of strip down out of stuff when it's time for bed. And am I freezing and miserable for the first 5 minutes that I'm in bed? You betcha. But I know that that's what I need to sleep better because I wake up very easily when I get hot.
Yes, for sure. So when we're talking about temperature, it's important to realize how much that impacts your circadian rhythm throughout the day as well, because our body temperatures change and follow this kind of curve throughout the day,
Mhm.
along with our circadian rhythm. So when we're about ready to go to sleep, our body temperatures steadily drop and continue to drop until 4 a.m. And then that keeps us cool and helps us stay asleep. And then as we wake, like around 6 a.m., from 4 to 6, things are starting to warm up, and it it helps us to become more activated.
Mhm.
This plays into our body's regulation of cortisol throughout the day. And it can be very important for our overall hormone production and regulation throughout the day. So, for instance, if you're going to exercise, that's a warming activity, right? So
Mhm.
that is optimal to be done at the beginning of the day to midday because it's so warming. If you exercise at 8 p.m., that's why you have trouble going to sleep. Like
Mhm.
your body was supposed to cool down, not do a cardiovascular exercise and warm up at 8 p.m. And then on the other side, like if you're going to take a cold shower, I recommend cold showers for people like just to down regulate the nervous system. That's optimal to be done towards the beginning of the day as well. Because after you take a cold shower, you're so cold, your body was shivering, like will heat up. So when you take that cold shower, the response is a rapid heating up. So if you do that right before you go to sleep, sometimes that can negatively impact people as well. So
Mhm.
just thinking about that temperature throughout the day, and I'll try to put in the show notes like a graph for you to kind of show how that ebbs
That's
and
what I was gonna say. I know there's some good graphs out there. Some of them I've seen and has it like that our body temperature actually peaks around 4 p.m. and that it bottoms out in valleys around 2 a.m. And so I think that can be helpful to know because back whenever we were talking about, well, why is it that that 10 to 6 window seems to be so good for people? Well, if your temperature is bottoming out at 2 a.m., there's a lot of processes that are happening that because I've talked to some people, they're like, I sleep 8 hours. I go to bed at 7 and I get up at 3. I get what you're saying there, but there's some things that are hardwired into our system that regardless of if it's that full 8 hours or not, that can really get affected. And that's where it kind of gets into affecting non-REM versus REM. But I think you can kind of know those time frames and then use that as a rule. So, if we know that our body temperature peaks at 4 p.m., that means everything after 4 p.m. is really kind of starting the process of going to bed.
yep,
So, I'm not like an early dinner person. It doesn't work with my work schedule to eat dinner at 4 p.m., but something like, if I get home at 5:30 from work, I try to eat dinner as quickly as I possibly can. It drives my husband crazy because he's a late dinner person, but he's really an early dinner person. He just doesn't maybe realize what the late dinner is doing to his sleep. But that is all because I'm trying to match what's happening in my life with what that sleep process is. And I think kind of getting back to what you're saying with exercise and things like if you kind of know when those ranges are, you can help sort of plan your days and say, is this a kind of an upregulating or a downregulating thing that I'm doing right now?
for sure, for sure. So besides the thermostat, what's something else we can do?
So, one thing that I have recently found that I absolutely love is a weighted blanket. When I first started digging into sleep research, this was not out there, but I'd had a few people tell me they thought I would like a weighted blanket, and then I actually saw a research article looking at people's sleep quality with a weighted blanket, and that's all I needed to make my $50 Amazon purchase. Actually, my husband got me a weighted blanket. I shouldn't say that. But I have personally found, and there's some research to back this up, that I sleep much better with a weighted blanket. And I have had some patients tell me as well. I actually had a patient who was really struggling with waking up a lot to have to go pee during her pregnancy. And, she, like a lot of women, just thought that was normal because I'm sure all of her friends told her that they had to wake up to pee a lot while they were pregnant. And she just thought that was part of it. And we started doing a little bit of a breathing program. She started meditating, got a weighted blanket, and voila, she's sleeping all the way through the night. So a weighted blanket is one thing that I love, but I will say you do have to be a little bit careful that they're warm. And so for me, like I can't sleep with a lot of other blankets because now we're working on that temperature thing. But a
Well,
weighted blanket is a great easy thing.
you will love this. I have found the coolest thing. So it's a weighted blanket, but it actually has a cooling system.
Oh, okay, I like that.
It's pretty cool. It's a little more expensive. It's called a chili blanket. I actually have it on my e-store now because I think it's awesome
Yeah, that's awesome.
because it gives you that tactile sensation and it cools you at the same time. And I'm like, that's amazing.
Hmm.
So generally for adults, like you probably need at least a 15-pound
I've
blanket.
heard 10% is a good 10% of your body weight can be a
Yeah.
good reference.
Yes, so just think about it. It is another really good option for kids, but you don't want to give a 50-pound kid a 15-pound blanket. You'd want to give him a 5-pound blanket. So you want to make adjustments, and that definitely has improved the sleep of all of our children. Is having weighted blankets. So we have a lot of different weights around the house for different people and their needs. So I
And
love it.
that's something too, I would say give it some time because I know for me, the first few nights I slept with it, I actually had a hard time sleeping. There's even one night, like my dog laid down on the weighted blanket. I kind of just started to feel trapped. I was like, I need to get out of here. So it does take or can take a little bit to get used to, but it can be great for helping with sleep.
For sure. Yes. All right. Anything else we can do?
Big thing, and I know I'm sure you've talked about this a lot with like your podcast and different things, but a lot of benefit in meditation. I will say the research that I've seen on meditation, it we maybe don't do it consistently enough or for long enough to really see big changes. So this some of the stuff I've seen where significant change was made was with 15 minutes a day seemed to be kind of like a cutoff point for when it's helpful or not helpful. So if you're someone who's maybe tried meditation or if you have like a set prayer time, we've talked about a lot of the benefits of meditation have also been if you've spent any time meditating, it's very similar to prayer for I think a lot of people where it's a very intentional time where you're trying to be free of distractions from the outside world. And so I think you could apply that to prayer as well, but 15 minutes seems to kind of be that cut point. So if you're someone who's maybe tried it and you're like, I don't know if that really helps, it may be that the consistency is something that has to be increased a little, or the time doing it, but then also the consistency over time
Yeah.
to really reap those benefits.
Yeah. And, in the scripture, it talks about meditating, like I meditate on your word day and night. And that word meditate, it means ruminating. Like it means thinking about, chewing on, uh,
Hmm.
just really focusing the mind on. And so I think that can look very different in different ways, but I think the number one thing across the board is just a period of stillness, where you're not distracted or doing other things, but a period of stillness where your mind is focused on like one specific thing. I have a really hard time focusing my mind. So I use Brain Tap. It's like a device I put on my head and it has some lights and it has guided meditation. But it helps me to kind of block out everything in the world, or I'll do some movement and listen to scripture. And kind of listen to that same scripture over and over again, or I'll turn on music that is like very light and calming, but reminds me of something that I want to think on. Like, I'm thinking about like, Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Like, I might just play the instrumental version of that in the background and just meditate on the Holy Spirit. So that's just some different tactics that I use.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to look or feel weird. It's just a period of stillness where,
Right. And I've had a lot of people say to me, and I would say I fit in this category, and I feel like you would say the same, Shelley, of well, that's really hard for me to focus, or I've tried doing that and it's really difficult to me. And I said to a patient the other day, I was like, well, if you didn't train for a marathon and tried to run a marathon, do you think it would be difficult? I mean, we get better at the things that we practice. I don't know why we don't apply that to our brain as well, or to assume that, I guess it we think it should just be easy to sit and be still and focus, but it's something, especially in our current day and age, that literally has to be practiced to do it well, because we have so many outside distractions and things. And that's something I've used the Headspace app, and I think there's several different apps, but one thing that I like that the Headspace app does is if you sign up for it, they have these courses, and their early courses are never longer than like 5 to 10 minutes, and I mean, these people know what they're doing. That's probably all you can do to start out, and that's but what was nice for me is whenever I first started using a meditation app, I remember it would be like, golly, I can't even make it through this whole thing without thinking about my to-do list or thinking about what all I need to do. And then as I got better at it, I got to the point where I was like, oh, it's already over. That was quick. Wish this would have been a little longer meditation that I had today. And so I think just knowing that it's okay if you need to start with 3 minutes of stillness and quietness, like build up to it. It's like anything, you have to train your brain just the same way you would train your body.
Yes. Um, and there was, well, Huberman Lab, they did a non-sleep deep rest meditation. It's like 10 minutes, and it's on YouTube. And it's just a guided meditation, kind of progressive relaxation type thing. And that one, 10 minutes. Like
Hmm.
that's it. But calming the mind is so very important to be able to optimize sleep. So you can do that through meditation. You can do that through optimizing the senses. So think about diffusing lavender oil, like that's very calming. Putting on white noise, that's very calming. Having a
Hmm.
cup of chamomile tea, that's very calming. Drawing some pictures, watching the sunset. You're just trying to down regulate your nervous system, and our senses are what tell us what's going on around us. So if you think about all of those activity versus like scrolling on the phone or ruminating on what you're doing tomorrow or trying to just get more stuff off your to-do list, those are very like sympathetic, hyperactive activities versus very calming activities. And when you choose to like consistently do calming activities, then you're able to get more into that calm state and rest better overall.
I think another great one too, Shelley, is candlelight, that we maybe didn't mention, because I think candlelight can be calming just in itself. But not only that, there's a decent amount of blue light that gets produced from. I think a lot of people have heard of blue light, and basically blue light has a major disruption in our melatonin production and our ability to get to sleep. But there's a lot of blue light in LED lights and different lights that we have in our home, and so if you've got a lot of candles, if you're a candle person and you can switch over to candles at night or use more candles and less of those kind of harsh LED lights, that's a small change. It doesn't take you that much more time, isn't that much more work, but can help with that sleep efficiency that we're talking about.
And I mean, the kids love it too. Honestly, it's fun. It's good.
Yeah,
It's
it's fun.
fun. It's
Right.
different. It's different. So we try to do a candlelight dinner once a week. And we do that to just kind of prepare for our day of rest. And it's just become a fun tradition. Like, all right, we're settling down. And we try to do that like all throughout our day of rest and have no screens for a whole day for our family, which has been really good. We've enjoyed that.
Yeah, I'm sure. That kind of makes me want to do that.
It is. It's nice. I look forward to it now. So like talking about the day of the rest, I don't think it's any coincidence that one of the Ten Commandments is to keep the Sabbath. I
Hmm.
think God knew what he was doing when he designed rest to be a part of natural rhythms. I don't think it has to be a legalistic thing where like you have to do it a certain way at a certain time. And all this. I don't think that's what he meant, but I think that he didn't mean to run yourself ragged every single day of the week at all hours. I think, you know, our culture's made it to where we don't have a day of rest anymore. So in order to have one, you really have to fight for it. You really have to make it like
Hmm.
sacred time. And, I hear people say they don't have time. And I'm like, I used to not have time either. Nothing's changed except I reprioritized my time. Uh,
Hmm.
and when you fight for it, then you have a day to reflect, which is really important. Be still, connect with the people you love, rest if you need to take a nap or need to sleep more, and just improve your overall well-being just by being present and being still. So I don't think that's any coincidence. I think that we have to really look at ourselves and see, okay, where am I falling on this sleep spectrum? Am I going 100 miles an hour all the time? Am I being lazy over here? Like there's a happy place, but I think most of us fall on this end where we're going, 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 going. And that produces stress and that produces a whole host of health issues that we've talked about at length today. But it also doesn't allow us time, just to grow closer to God and grow closer to each other. We don't make time for it anymore. So we encourage you to find rest, and try to make time for sleep, improve your habits, because long term, for you to do what you feel like you're called to do here on this earth, you have to have it. It's an essential part of your life. And God's commanded us to rest. So hopefully, this encourages you today to take a few steps in that direction.
Yep, and be proud of it. There's
Yes,
nothing to be ashamed of for getting a great night of sleep.
that's true. Well, Suzanne, is there anything else you want to add today?
I think that's it. Obviously, you can reach out if you have any questions, and but I kind of mean that when I say it. I think that's the biggest thing is just encourage those around you to rest too, because I do think what we hit on at the beginning is this is a it is a little bit of a societal issue and kind of how we look at it. But hopefully, with podcasts like this and just talking about it, more and more people will start to realize this is as important as a lot of the other things that we know go into us being healthy humans. So
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
absolutely.
All right. So I just want to pray over you today as you are thinking about sleep and rest, and hopefully in that contemplative stage of trying to make some changes. Dear Lord, thank you so much for all of your blessings, Lord. Thank you for the the people that are listening today, the people that want to know more to be able to dive in and change their health. Lord, I pray that we will draw closer to you in times of meditation and prayer, and that we will put away distractions, that we will honor your holy day, that we will honor a day of rest, that we will seek you in the midst of the busyness, that we will take time to reevaluate what is best for our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our souls, and also for those of our families, God. Thank you that you are shifting our perspective, and we come before you in just a place of gratitude and thanks. We love you and we praise you for all that you are. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Thank you for being with us today, and thanks for listening to the Be Whole, Be Well, and Be Wise podcast. Make sure to join me on Instagram at shellytyler.dpt and join our private Facebook group, the Fiddlewood Community, by clicking on my link in my bio if you haven't already. Next week, we are starting the Stress Release Challenge for the spring. 5 days of learning to optimize your senses so you don't want to miss out on all this cool information. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon. Then subscribe so you don't miss our next episode when I will be talking about forming healthy relationships with food with mental health professional Lydia Benar.